Medieval folks believed a woman's eager womb could literally detach and wander through her body if she wasn't having enough sex, causing serious illness. Some thought that conceiving under the wrong stars could doom a child to a life of misery or mark them as a future leper, while simply looking at a rabbit during pregnancy might result in a baby born with a hair lip. It was also whispered that demons could father children with unsuspecting women, leading to offspring with strange and sometimes terrifying abilities. Number 11. Your womb could literally go for a stroll. And it was a big deal. Imagine being told that an organ inside your body could decide to pack its bags and go on an internal road trip. Well, for medieval women, this was a genuine concern, especially regarding the womb. This idea, known as the wandering womb, wasn't new to the Middle Ages. It actually stretched back to ancient Greek physicians like Hippocrates and Plato. They, and later, Roman doctors like Galen, whose theories dominated medieval medicine, described the uterus as being like a separate, almost living creature within a woman's body. Picture it as a small animal, an animal within an animal, with its own desires and needs. What did this wandering womb crave? Mostly it desired moisture and, importantly, for procreation, to be occupied with the business of making babies. If a woman wasn't engaging in regular sexual intercourse or wasn't pregnant, her womb was thought to become idle or dry. An unhappy, dry womb was a restless womb. It was believed that such a womb might detach from its usual spot in the lower abdomen and begin to roam upwards in the body, searching for moisture, or perhaps just out of sheer frustration. When the womb went on one of these internal adventures, it wasn't pleasant for the woman. The primary symptom was often described as suffocation, a condition later termed hysteria, from the Greek word hystera, meaning womb. As the womb traveled upwards, it could press against other organs like the diaphragm, lungs, and heart. This pressure was thought to cause a terrifying array of symptoms: shortness of breath, a feeling of choking, fainting spells, palpitations, convulsions, speechlessness, and even a temporary loss of senses, resembling death. Some medical texts described the womb as being enraged or agitated. So, how did medieval physicians and folk healers try to coax this wayward organ back to its rightful place? The treatments were quite something. Since the womb was believed to be attracted to pleasant smells and repelled by foul ones, a common strategy involved scent therapy. Sweet-smelling perfumes, herbs like spikenard or storax, or even burnt wool or hair might be held near the woman's vulva to lure the womb downwards. Simultaneously, nasty-smelling substances like burnt horn, castor oil, or even smoldering old leather would be held to her nose to drive the womb away from the upper body. Fumigation. Where scented smoke was directed into the vagina was another popular method. Beyond smells, other treatments included applying warm compresses to the abdomen, gentle massage to guide the womb back, or tying ligatures around the thighs to supposedly prevent its upward movement. Of course, the most recommended long-term solution was marriage and regular sexual intercourse. This was thought to anchor the womb, keep it moist, and fulfill its natural purpose, thus preventing it from wandering in the first place. For a woman hoping to conceive, a stable, contented womb was considered absolutely essential. An organ on the move was not conducive to nurturing a new life. This belief underscored the immense pressure on women to marry and bear children, not just for societal reasons, but for their very physical health as understood at the time. Number 10. Planning a baby? Better check your horoscope first. In the medieval world, the stars and planets weren't just pretty lights in the sky. They were powerful forces that were believed to exert a direct influence on everything on Earth, from the weather and the tides to the health and destiny of human beings. It's no surprise then that astrology played a massive role in medieval medicine, and this extended deeply into matters of fertility, conception, and childbirth. If you were trying to start a family, consulting an astrologer or a physician well-versed in astrology was often considered as important as any other medical advice. It wasn't just the child's birth date that mattered. The astrological conditions at the very moment of conception were thought to be absolutely critical. Physicians and learned individuals believed that the specific alignment of planets, the phase of the moon, and the dominant zodiac sign at the time of intercourse could determine not only the likelihood of conception but also the sex of the child, its physical characteristics, its temperament, and even its future path in life. Imagine the pressure of trying to time intimacy perfectly with the cosmos. Certain celestial bodies were associated with specific outcomes. For instance, the planet Mars, known for its fiery and masculine nature, was thought to favor the conception of boys if it was prominent during the act. Venus, the planet of love and femininity, was linked to the conception of girls. The moon, with its cyclical phases, was considered particularly influential on female fertility and the menstrual cycle. Conception during a new moon might be viewed differently than conception during a full moon. Some astrological texts provided detailed charts and tables indicating auspicious and inauspicious times for attempting to conceive. These guides would consider the positions of the sun, moon, and planets within the 12 houses of the zodiac. A physician might advise a couple wishing for a healthy and virtuous child to try and conceive when Jupiter, associated with good fortune and wisdom, or Venus, who was in a favorable position, perhaps in a fertile zodiac sign like Cancer, Scorpio, or Pisces. Conversely, they would warn against attempting conception when malefic planets like Saturn, associated with misfortune, coldness, and melancholy, or Mars in a bad aspect, were dominant, or if the moon was in a barren sign like Gemini, Leo, or Virgo. Such unfavorable alignments were thought to risk infertility, difficult pregnancies, stillbirths, or children born with physical ailments or undesirable personality traits. Some even believed that conceiving under particularly ill-omened stars could result in a child destined for a life of hardship, disease like leprosy, or even criminality. During pregnancy, the stars continued to hold sway. Eclipses or the appearance of comets were often seen as bad omens, potentially threatening the pregnancy or portending a difficult birth, or a child with an unusual destiny. Midwives and mothers-to-be would pay close attention to such celestial events. The belief in astrological influence was so pervasive that it shaped medical practice, personal decisions, and the general understanding of how life unfolded, tying the intimate act of procreation directly to the grand movements of the cosmos. Number 9. The delicate dance of bodily humors for making babies. Step into a medieval doctor's shoes, and you'd see the human body not as a system of cells and organs in the modern sense, but as a miniature universe governed by 4 fundamental substances called humors. This was the theory of humoralism, inherited from ancient Greek physicians like Hippocrates and Galen, and it was the bedrock of Western medicine for over 1,000 years, deeply influencing beliefs about fertility. The 4 humors were blood, phlegm, yellow bile or choler, and black bile or melancholy. Each humor was linked to one of the 4 elements, air, water, fire, earth, respectively, and possessed 2 of the 4 primary qualities, hot, cold, wet, or dry. A person's health, temperament, and crucially their fertility were all thought to depend on the proper balance of these four humors. Everyone had a unique humoral constitution, but generally, men were considered to be hotter and drier by nature, while women were seen as colder and wetter. This fundamental difference was believed to be key to their reproductive roles. For conception to occur, both partners needed to have their humors in a state of relative harmony, though a certain degree of heat was considered essential for procreation. Semen, the male contribution to generation, was thought to be a highly refined substance, essentially a concentrate of the most potent parts of the four humors produced from purified blood. Its quality and potency depended directly on the man's humoral balance. If a man was too cold or too moist, his semen might be deemed weak or infertile. If he was excessively hot, it could also be problematic. Similarly, a woman's ability to conceive and nurture a fetus was tied to her humoral state. If she was too cold, her womb might not be receptive. If too hot or dry, it might not provide a suitable environment. Therefore, a significant part of medieval advice for couples trying to conceive focused on diet and lifestyle adjustments aimed at correcting any perceived humoral imbalances. Foods were categorized by their humoral qualities. For example, if a woman was considered too cold and wet to conceive, she might be advised to eat hot and dry foods like pepper, ginger, mustard, roasted meats, and to drink wine. Conversely, a man who was overly hot might be told to consume cooling foods like lettuce, cucumbers, or certain fruits. The seasons, climate, and even a person's occupation were also thought to affect their humoral balance. If a couple was struggling with infertility, a physician would likely assess their humors. This might involve examining their urine, pulse, and overall complexion. Treatments could include bloodletting to remove an excess of hot blood, purging to expel excess bile or phlegm, and prescribing specific diets or herbal concoctions designed to restore the desired humoral equilibrium. For instance, a diagnosis of coldness of the womb might lead to prescriptions for warming herbs and pessaries medicated vaginal suppositories to directly heat the area. The success of conception, the health of the pregnancy, and even the temperament of the child to be born were all intricately linked in the medieval mind to this delicate, ever-shifting dance of the body's internal fluids. Achieving the right humoral mix was a vital first step on the path to parenthood. Number 8. Magical mandrakes and potent potions for procreation. When prayers and medical advice weren't enough to bring about a much-desired pregnancy, many medieval people turned to the world of plants' charms and long-held folk remedies. Among the most famous and mysterious of these was the mandrake, root Mandragora officinarum. This plant held a powerful grip on the medieval imagination, largely due to the peculiar, often vaguely human-like shape of its forked root. This resemblance led to the belief that it possessed potent magical properties, especially concerning fertility and love. The mandrake even gets a mention in the Old Testament, where Rachel, desperate for children, bargains for mandrakes collected by her sister Leah's son. The lore surrounding the mandrake was as strange as its appearance. It was widely believed that the plant would shriek when pulled from the ground, and that this scream was so powerful it could kill or drive mad anyone who heard it. To harvest it safely, elaborate rituals were described. One common method involved loosening the earth around the root, then tying one end of a rope to the plant and the other to a dog. The harvester would then retreat to a safe distance, plug their ears, and call the dog or entice it with food. As the dog lunged forward, It would pull the mandrake from the ground, supposedly dying in the process, thus sparing the human. Once obtained, the mandrake root was a prized possession. It was used in various ways to promote conception. Small pieces might be worn as amulets around the neck or waist, or placed under the marital bed. It could be steeped in wine or other liquids to create a fertility potion for the woman to drink. Some believed that simply keeping a mandrake root in the house would enhance fertility. Its reputation as an aphrodisiac also contributed to its use in matters of love and procreation. But the mandrake wasn't the only plant in the medieval fertility arsenal. A vast pharmacopoeia of herbs and other natural substances was employed. Vervain, also known as enchanter's plant, was another popular choice, often used in love potions and fertility charms. Mugwort, sage, basil, and fennel were also commonly cited in medieval herbals for their supposed ability to aid conception or regulate a woman's cycles. These herbs might be consumed as teas, added to baths, or carried in pouches. The recipes for these concoctions were often complex, sometimes requiring specific prayers or incantations to be recited during their preparation or use, blurring the line between medicine and magic. Beyond the plant kingdom, animal parts also featured in some fertility remedies, reflecting a belief in sympathetic magic that like influences like, or that a substance from a fertile animal could transfer its properties. For instance, consuming the uterus of a hare, a famously prolific animal, or parts of a rooster or fox testicles were practices mentioned in some texts. While learned physicians might focus on humoral theory, for many ordinary people, these tangible, often mysterious remedies offered a direct and hopeful, if sometimes dangerous, path towards achieving the dream of having children. The desire for offspring was so profound that people were willing to explore a wide range of options, from the medically prescribed to the magically potent. Number 7. When angels and demons meddled in the bedroom. The medieval world was a place where the spiritual and physical realms were deeply intertwined. People believed that angels and demons were not distant entities but active forces that could intervene directly in human affairs, including the most intimate aspects of life, like marriage and procreation. This belief led to some rather startling ideas about how pregnancies could begin and what could influence them. One of the most intriguing and sometimes terrifying beliefs was in the existence of incubi and succubi. Incubi were male demons said to prey on women in their sleep, having sexual intercourse with them. Succubi were their female counterparts, seducing men. It was widely discussed by theologians and scholars, including prominent figures like St. Augustine and Thomas Aquinas, whether children could actually be born from such unions. The general consensus was that demons, being spiritual beings, couldn't procreate on their own. However, a theory developed that an incubus could collect semen from a man, perhaps one engaged in masturbation or nocturnal emissions, or even by acting as a succubus to a man first, and then quickly transfer it to a woman to impregnate her. Children believed to be fathered by incubi were often thought to possess unusual traits. Sometimes they were depicted as being exceptionally clever, wicked, or possessing magical abilities. The legendary wizard Merlin, for instance, was famously reputed in some tales to be the son of a mortal woman and an incubus. On the darker side, physical deformities or a malevolent nature in a child might also be attributed to such a demonic conception. These beliefs could offer an explanation for unexpected pregnancies, especially outside of marriage or for children who seemed disturbingly different. Conversely, divine intervention was also sought for fertility. Couples struggling to conceive would fervently pray to God, and specific saints renowned for their intercession in such matters. Saint Anne, the mother of the Virgin Mary, was a particularly popular patron saint of barren women and expectant mothers. Saint Nicholas was another invoked for the protection of children. Saint Margaret of Antioch was called upon by women in labor for a safe delivery. As legend had it, she had escaped from the belly of a dragon, symbolizing the overcoming of demonic forces during childbirth. Pilgrimages to shrines, the veneration of relics, and the offering of vows were common practices to seek heavenly aid. An angelic intervention might be hoped for, leading to a blessed and healthy child, perhaps even one destined for a holy life. The perceived battle between good and evil played out even in the womb. Difficult pregnancies, miscarriages, stillbirths, or prolonged and dangerous labors could be blamed on demonic harassment or witchcraft. Charms, amulets inscribed with holy names or symbols, and prayers were used as spiritual armor to protect the mother and unborn child from malevolent supernatural influences. Thus, the medieval bedroom and birthing chamber were seen as potential sites for cosmic struggles, where the fate of a new life could hang in the balance between infernal meddling and divine grace. Number 6. Careful what you look at, Mom. Your baby might get its features. Imagine being pregnant and knowing that every strong emotion you felt, every shocking sight you witnessed, or even every intense food craving you had, could directly and physically shape your unborn child. This was the potent belief in maternal impression, or imaginationism, a widespread idea in the medieval period and for centuries thereafter. It held that a pregnant woman's sensory experiences and her imagination had the power to imprint themselves onto the developing fetus, leading to birthmarks, physical characteristics, or even congenital deformities. The theory went like this. A vivid experience or a strong, unfulfilled desire in the mother could somehow transmit a corresponding mark or feature to the child. For example, if a pregnant woman was suddenly frightened by a mouse scurrying across the floor, her child might be born with a mouse-shaped birthmark, or even possess a timid, mouse-like disposition. If she intensely craved strawberries and couldn't get them, or perhaps touched a part of her body while thinking about them, the baby might be born with a red strawberry-like mark, a hemangioma, on that corresponding spot. Tales abounded of women who saw a hare during pregnancy and whose children were subsequently born with a hare lip, or women who witnessed a fire and whose babies had red marks or an agitated temperament. This belief wasn't just folk superstition. It was discussed by physicians and scholars. They theorized that the mother's strong imagination could alter the flow of her blood or vapors that nourished the fetus, thereby impressing a form or quality onto its malleable substance. The timing of the impression was also considered. Some believed it was most potent during the early stages of pregnancy, when the fetus was thought to be most susceptible to shaping. The implications of this belief were significant, placing a considerable psychological burden on expectant mothers. They were advised to surround themselves with beauty, peace, and calm. Looking at beautiful art, listening to harmonious music, and maintaining serene thoughts were encouraged to ensure a beautiful and well-formed child. Conversely, they were cautioned to avoid shocking or ugly sights, distressing news, or violent emotions. If a woman did encounter something upsetting, she was sometimes advised to immediately touch a less conspicuous part of her body, like her backside, in the hope that any resulting mark would appear there rather than on the child's face. Monstrous births, children born with severe congenital abnormalities, were sometimes explained through this lens. If a woman had, for instance, been terrified by an animal, or had sinful or bestial thoughts, the resulting child's deformity might be attributed to that powerful negative impression. While sometimes such births were also blamed on divine wrath or demonic influence, maternal impression offered a more naturalistic, albeit still mystifying explanation that focused on the mother's experiences during gestation. This idea highlighted the perceived deep connection between mother and child, suggesting that her inner world could literally sculpt the physical form of the life within her. Number 5. The heavy shadow of sin on fertility and offspring. In the deeply religious medieval world, life events were rarely seen as purely random or solely due to natural causes. Divine will and moral standing were believed to play a crucial role in worldly affairs, and this was particularly true when it came to the blessings of family and children. The inability to conceive or the birth of a child with abnormalities was often interpreted through a moral and theological lens, frequently linked to the concept of sin, barrenness. The failure of a married couple to produce offspring was a source of great sorrow and social stigma. While sometimes medical reasons based on humoral theory or other physical causes were considered, a persistent lack of children could lead a couple and the community around them to suspect divine displeasure. It was a commonly held belief that infertility might be a direct punishment from God for sins committed by one or both spouses. These could be specific transgressions, like adultery, heresy, or excessive worldly pride, or a more general state of ungodliness. Sins of the couple's ancestors could even be thought to cast a long shadow affecting the fertility of subsequent generations. Consequently, couples desperate for children often turn to spiritual remedies alongside, or even before, medical ones. Intense prayer, fasting, and acts of penance were undertaken in hopes of atoning for past sins and winning back God's favor. Pilgrimages to the shrines of saints, known for interceding in matters of fertility, like Saint Anne or Saint Colette, were common. Making charitable donations or vowing to dedicate a child to the church, if one was conceived, were other ways people sought to appease the divine and lift the perceived curse of barrenness. Confession of sins to a priest and receiving absolution were considered vital steps in seeking God's help. The birth of a child with significant physical deformities, often termed a monstrous birth, was an even more potent source of fear and speculation. Such an event could be interpreted as a stark sign of God's anger or a warning to the community. The specific nature of the deformity was sometimes scrutinized for clues about the underlying sin. For instance, children born with features deemed animalistic might lead to accusations or suspicions of bestiality on the part of a parent. Other parental sins, like incest, intercourse during forbidden times, such as Lent or holy days, or lustful thoughts during conception, were also blamed. The Book of Vices and Virtues, a popular 14th century text, explicitly stated that children conceived in sin might be born counterfeit, or blind or crippled or hunchbacked, or they will have some other disgusting blemish. While maternal impression or demonic interference were also cited as potential causes for such births, the explanation of divine punishment for sin was powerful and pervasive. It served as a stark reminder of the need for moral uprightness and adherence to religious doctrine. This belief system placed immense pressure on individuals, particularly women, and could lead to feelings of guilt, shame, and ostracization if they failed to produce healthy children, as it was often assumed that some hidden sin was the root cause of their misfortune. Number 4. Bedroom, acrobatics, and gender guessing games. Beyond the grand influences of stars and humors, medieval beliefs about fertility also delved into the very practical and personal details of the marital act itself. It was widely thought that the specific sexual position used during intercourse could influence not only the likelihood of conception, but also, fascinatingly, the sex of the resulting child. These ideas were often rooted in ancient medical theories, particularly those of Galen. Galen's influential anatomical and physiological theories proposed a kind of symmetry between male and female reproductive organs, though with a hierarchical understanding. He suggested that the right side of the body was generally hotter and stronger than the left. This translated to the belief that the right testicle produced seed that would generate male offspring, while the left testicle produced female-generating seed. Similarly, the right ovary and the right side of the uterus were associated with boys, and the left with girls. From this, a whole set of recommendations arose. If a couple desired a son, it was advised that the man should try to ensure his right-sided seed was dominant. This could involve tying off the left testicle during intercourse, a practice mentioned though its commonality is debatable and likely risky. After intercourse, the woman was advised to lie on her right side to encourage the semen to flow into the right side of her womb, believed to be more conducive to male development. Conversely, for a daughter, lying on the left side was recommended. Some even suggested that the man should dismount from the woman on the side corresponding to the desired sex of the child. The man on top or missionary position was generally considered the most natural and effective for conception by both medical authorities and the church. This was partly because it was seen as allowing the semen to be deposited deep within the vagina and to be retained more easily. Theologians favored this position as it was deemed less driven by lust and more focused on the procreative purpose of marriage. Other sexual positions were often viewed with suspicion by ecclesiastical authorities, sometimes condemned as unnatural, lustful, or even sinful, potentially hindering conception or leading to imperfect offspring. Texts known as penitentials, which listed sins and their prescribed penances, sometimes included specific prohibitions against certain coital acts or positions. The timing of intercourse in relation to a woman's menstrual cycle was also considered, although the medieval understanding of ovulation was very limited and often inaccurate. Some believed that conception was most likely just after menstruation, when the womb was thought to be cleansed and eager to receive seed. Others had different theories about the fertile window. The perceived heat or vigor of both partners during the act was also deemed important. A passionate, but not overly lustful encounter was thought to generate stronger, more fertile seed and create a more receptive environment in the womb. These beliefs illustrate how even the most private aspects of married life were subject to a complex web of medical, social, and religious ideas aimed at maximizing the chances of procreation and, if possible, even influencing the next generation. Number 3. The stronger seed. And who really made the baby? In the medieval quest to understand how new life began, one of the central questions was about the respective contributions of the man and woman. What exactly did each parent provide to create a child? The answers, drawn heavily from ancient Greek philosophers and physicians, painted a picture where the male role was often seen as more active and formative, though different theories coexisted. The most dominant theory, inherited from Aristotle, proposed a model where the man provided the form or the soul and the efficient cause, essentially the blueprint and the active agent that initiated development. His semen was the carrier of this generative power. The woman, in this Aristotelian view, provided the matter. Her menstrual blood was seen as the raw material from which the fetus was nourished and built. Her womb provided the place, the nutritive environment, much like soil for a seed. In this model, the woman's role was more passive, akin to an incubator that nurtured the male seed. This aligned with broader societal views of men as active and women as passive. However, another significant theory stemming from Galen and Hippocrates suggested that both sexes produced seed. The male seed was semen, and the female seed was thought to be a less potent, often wetter or colder fluid, released from what were considered female testicles, the ovaries, though their function wasn't fully understood. According to this Galenic view, the child was formed from a mixture of both male and female seeds. If the male seed was stronger, hotter, or predominated in the mixture, a boy would result. If the female seed was stronger, or the male seed was weaker or colder, a girl would be conceived. This idea offered a more active, though still often secondary, role for the woman's contribution. Even within the two-seed theory, there was often an emphasis on the superior quality or power of the male seed. The heat and vigor of the man at the moment of conception were considered crucial. A strong, healthy man in his prime, full of vital heat, was thought to produce potent seed more likely to result in a male child, who was generally preferred in many medieval societies for reasons of inheritance and lineage. If a man was old, sickly, or lacking in heat, his seed might be weaker, leading to a female child or no conception at all. A fascinating aspect of the Galenic theory was the belief by some that female orgasm was necessary for conception. It was thought that orgasm caused the woman to release her seed, which could then mix with the man's. This idea, while not universally accepted, did suggest a more active female participation in the process. Medical texts sometimes offered advice to men on how to ensure their wives experience pleasure, not for its own sake, but to improve the chances of conception. These differing theories about seed and generation had implications beyond just understanding biology. They reinforced social hierarchies and gender roles. The Aristotelian view, in particular, provided a scientific basis for male dominance, as the man was seen as providing the essential spark of life. The debates and beliefs surrounding the nature and power of male and female contributions were central to how medieval society understood family lineage and the very creation of human beings. Number 2. Midwives, keepers of ancient secrets and risky rituals. In an era long before hospitals became the standard place for birth, and when male physicians rarely attended deliveries unless severe complications arose, the midwife was the undisputed queen of the birthing chamber. Childbirth was almost exclusively a female domain, a space of shared experience, support, and traditional wisdom passed down through generations of women. Midwives were central, indispensable figures in medieval communities, overseeing the journey from pregnancy through labor and the immediate postpartum period. A midwife's training was typically not formal or academic in the way a university-educated physician's was. Instead, she learned her craft through apprenticeship, observing and assisting experienced midwives, often her own mother or another female relative. Over years, she would accumulate a vast store of practical knowledge about the stages of labor techniques for easing pain, methods for dealing with common difficulties, and the care of newborns. She knew how to palpate the abdomen to assess the baby's position, how to support the laboring woman, and when to intervene with manual maneuvers if the birth was not progressing smoothly. They employed birthing stools, which allowed gravity to aid delivery, encouraged various laboring positions, and used massage and herbal remedies. However, a midwife's stukat extended far beyond purely practical skills. Her role was deeply interwoven with the spiritual and magical beliefs of the time. To ensure a safe delivery and protect both mother and child from harm, whether natural or supernatural, midwives employed a wide array of charms, amulets, and rituals. Eagle stones, atites, which were hollow geodes containing loose pebbles that rattled when shaken, were highly valued. It was believed that if an eagle stone was tied to a laboring woman's thigh, it would help draw the baby out. Coral, jasper, and other gemstones were also worn or placed near the mother for their protective qualities. Prayers and incantations were a vital part of the midwife's practice. She might recite specific psalms, passages from the Gospels, particularly the opening of John's Gospel, or traditional rhyming charms to invoke divine aid and ward off evil spirits or complications. The Solcher Aripo Tenet Opera Rotas Milandrone Square was sometimes written on a piece of parchment and given to the laboring woman to hold or even consume, written on a piece of bread to ease delivery. Relics of saints or items blessed at shrines might also be brought into the birthing room. Despite their crucial role, midwives sometimes walked a precarious line. If too many mothers or babies under her care died or suffered complications, suspicions could arise. In an age where misfortune was often attributed to malice or supernatural causes, a midwife whose practice was associated with bad outcomes could be accused of incompetence, negligence, or even witchcraft, especially if she was known to use remedies that seemed too reliant on magic rather than prayer. The Church made efforts to regulate midwifery, primarily to ensure that midwives were baptizing newborns correctly in emergencies, and to prevent them from performing abortions or engaging in what was considered sorcery. Midwives were often required to take oaths before ecclesiastical authorities, swearing to uphold Christian practices and to report any unbaptized infants or heretical activities. Nevertheless, they remained the primary caregivers for birthing women, embodying a unique blend of empirical skill, traditional lore, and ritual practice. Number 1. The mysterious powers of menstrual blood and post-birth purification. Menstrual blood occupied a peculiar and often contradictory place in the medieval understanding of the female body and reproduction. It was simultaneously seen as the very stuff of life and a substance imbued with potentially dangerous or polluting qualities. These beliefs, drawn from ancient medical texts, religious interpretations, and folk traditions, profoundly shaped attitudes towards women's bodies and their roles in procreation and society. According to the influential Aristotelian view, which largely prevailed, menstrual blood was the matter provided by the woman for the formation of a fetus. The male seed, it was thought, acted upon this blood, coagulating and shaping it into a new human being. In this sense, menstrual blood was essential, the raw material from which all life was made and subsequently nourished in the womb. It was seen as a surplus of blood that, if not used for pregnancy, was regularly expelled. However, alongside this idea of menstrual blood as life-giving prima materia, there existed a strong current of belief that portrayed it as impure and even harmful. These notions were ancient, finding powerful expression in texts like Pliny the Elder's Natural History, which was widely read and cited throughout the Middle Ages. Pliny described menstruating women as having the power to blight crops merely by walking past them, cause fruit to fall from trees, sour wine, dull mirrors, rust iron and bronze, and even make dogs go mad if they tasted the blood. Contact with menstrual blood was said to have a range of detrimental effects on the natural world. These ideas of impurity were reinforced by certain interpretations of Old Testament laws concerning ritual cleanliness, which stipulated periods of separation for menstruating women. While the direct application of these laws varied, the underlying notion that menstruation involved a degree of uncleanness or pollution persisted. This could lead to social restrictions, such as women being discouraged from entering sacred spaces or handling sacred objects during their periods. Some believed that intercourse during menstruation was not only sinful, but could result in the conception of a leprous, epileptic, or deformed child, as the corrupt blood was thought to taint the offspring. Yet, paradoxically, menstrual blood was also sometimes attributed with medicinal or magical properties in folk remedies. It might be used in charms or potions for various ailments, though this was often a more clandestine practice, given the prevailing negative connotations. After the ordeal of childbirth, a woman was considered to be in a state of ritual impurity, partly due to the blood and fluids associated with delivery. This wasn't necessarily a judgment on her moral state, but rather a reflection of the profound physical and spiritual transition she had undergone. To mark her recovery and reintegration into the community, a special ceremony known as the churching of women was performed, typically taking place around 40 days after birth, mirroring the purification of the Virgin Mary after Jesus' birth. This ritual involved the woman, often accompanied by female friends, being met at the church door by a priest. Prayers of thanksgiving for her safe delivery and the new child were offered, and she was then formally led back into the church. Churching symbolized her cleansing, her return to normal religious life, and often her resumption of sexual relations with her husband. It was an important social and religious rite of passage, acknowledging the immense event of birth and the unique status of the mother.